Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. A while ago, one of you guys asked, what would happen had the Yuuzhan Vong invaded during the Clone Wars? This scenario immediately piqued my interest because actually, when I read the New Jedi Order novel series as a kid, that's when I went from being a casual Star Wars fan to a much more hardcore Star Wars fan. Like, there were like 20 books in that series, and I remember getting them all at like Barnes & Nobles. But anyway, it was KOTOR, the Clone Wars original cartoon had come out. We also had the prequels coming out. That was kind of like the starter pack of that period. It was prequels and then Yuuzhan Vong. And Yuuzhan Vong represented a pretty big departure from the mainstream Skywalker saga, both in tone and also themes. Whereas the original trilogy was about hope and good overcoming evil, the New Jedi Order featured a much darker and morally ambiguous sequel to the original trilogy. And just like how the sequel trilogy by Disney is pretty controversial, the New Jedi Order sequel series was also very controversial. There were highly, highly unpopular moments in the New Jedi Order, like when the Yuuzhan Vong dropped the moon on Chewbacca. That's just the kind of aliens these guys were. They were cunning, ruthless, completely foreign to the Star Wars galaxy, and the devastation they caused was probably worse than any other conflict in Star Wars history. The Yuuzhan Vong were essentially a faction of fanatic warriors who had become twisted and tortured by a devastating conflict in their old galaxy against an advanced machine race. They had won the war, but at great cost to their own souls, and more importantly, they basically destroyed most of the habitable planets in the galaxy. They are a dying species and they needed to find a new place to call home. This forced them to make the extremely difficult journey across the cold expanses between the galaxies and immigrate to the local Star Wars cluster. This process took centuries, during which time the Yuuzhan Vong experienced immense hardship and desperation in the confined quarters of their slowly dying world ships. Their only salvation during this time was basically training and preparing for this invasion that would one day come. Maybe not in their lifetime, but maybe in the next generation or the generation after that. When the Yuuzhan Vong finally arrived to the New Republic, they found a galaxy that was both militarily soft and politically disorganized. It was very easy for the Yuuzhan Vong's advanced agents to create chaos amongst the various factions that were vying for power. With the galaxy severely weakened, the Yuuzhan Vong would emerge from hiding, and they would do a lot of crazy things. I mean, they killed entire worlds like Ithor with bioweapons. They decimated the Jedi for the first few years as well, and they even managed to be the first invading army to actually take and hold Coruscant. Trillions of people would die in this process. It's for this reason why I've always described the New Jedi Order as like the closest thing in Star Wars to the Warhammer 40k universe, right? It's just a level of darkness there that you don't see in other parts of the Star Wars franchise. The Yuuzhan Vong, as far as I'm concerned, are the only threat in all of Star Wars that can come even close to one of the Xeno threats in Warhammer. So throwing this extremely volatile faction into the mix in the middle of the Clone Wars creates a very interesting scenario. Especially when you take into account that the Sith control both the Confederacy and the clones, and that the Separatist military specifically features a droid army. Something that will really affect their relationship with the Yuuzhan Vong. So once again, I can't help but stress how big of a risk it was for the Yuuzhan Vong to essentially leave their own galaxy and travel for the Star Wars galaxy. You see, unlike Morgan Elsbeth, the Yuuzhan Vong had a very different type of FTL travel that required nearby gravitational fields it could manipulate. In deep space, without reference points, their FTL travel system actually doesn't work. They also didn't have space whales or ancient witch magic to guide them along, and so they basically set off into the darkness relatively blind for an excruciating long journey at sublight speeds that lasted many generations. This species had invested everything into this great journey, and so it makes sense that the Yuuzhan Vong would actually create an additional fleet known as the Praetorite Vong. This is essentially a smaller version of one of their own fleets, with its own warships, slaves, attendants, capable of maintaining their own independent operations and military campaigns. The Praetorite Vong's main goal, however, was information gathering, fact-finding, understanding what was happening in the local galaxy, setting up a spy network, and potentially even collaborator networks that can help weaken the New Republic from within. The ultimate goal for the Praetorite Vong was to engage in some small-scale skirmishes to test the New Republic's battle readiness, and then finally establish a bridgehead for the full invasion fleet. This essentially made them part scouting party and part expeditionary force and part spying organization. The Praetorite Vong were mostly recruited from the Intendant caste. Known for their intelligence and cunning, this caste was very different from the Warrior and Shaper caste that most of you probably know. The Intendants were mostly like diplomats and politicians, spies. Some of them ran logistics, served as quartermasters as well. These were essentially individuals that used their brain and their intelligence over all their other skills. They were generally also less dogmatic in structure than the other castes in the Yuuzhan Vong. This gave them a lot of flexibility to blend into their surroundings and do what's necessary to fulfill their mission. Something that would be hard for a Yuuzhan Vong shaper to do because their bodies were just swimming with organic tech. That would make them immediately stand out, even in a huge crowd of diverse aliens. For Yuuzhan Vong warriors, honor was everything, and more importantly, the Yuuzhan Vong had a burning hatred for machine life because of what happened to their last galaxy, and they generally felt inclined to attack any mechanical being they saw, which of course will be problematic if you were part of the Praetorite Vong's fact-finding mission but blew up your spot, because you saw a food vending droid and wanted to attack it. And so as rigid as the Yuuzhan Vong were, they had enough foresight to allow the Intendant class to actively serve as a scouting party. This is the part of the operation that's the most tricky for the Yuuzhan Vong. They cannot mess this up. So, in advance of the advanced Praetorite Vong, you had special agents like Executor Nam Anor. His main job was to establish first contact, assess the situation on the ground, and potentially start a network of collaborators and spies. Individuals in this specific position hold a large amount of power, because in a lot of ways they're the ones who are directly educating the heads of the fleet, of the military, on what the situation is like, and what he says is basically going to really shape all policy moving forwards. The Yuuzhan Vong were lucky to have carried out their invasion during the New Republic era in Legends, when the galaxy was pretty fractured into many smaller factions. The Clone Wars period represents a very different situation. On the surface, the Separatist crisis might seem like the perfect opportunity to exploit. The Republic's attention is focused elsewhere. And actually, the Yuuzhan Vong and their initial invasion in the New Jedi Order also focused on attacking kind of border areas between factions so that the response against them wasn't focused or strong. I can see the Praetorite Vong also making a similar assessment of this galaxy and assuming that the Galactic Republic was at its weakest point, especially in the early years of the conflict when their forces were stretched thin, trying to contain the Separatist fleet. And this is really just the limitation with the Praetorite Vong. I mean, they might be good at collecting intel, but they're not that good. When it comes to understanding what's happening with the Clone Wars, well, not even the Jedi and the majority of the Senate really understood that the Sith had created and funded both sides of this crazy conflict. This, ironically, gives the Republic and the Sith a huge advantage. Individuals like Nam Anor were masters at political maneuvering. He would have sensed an opportunity to align the Praetorite Vong with the Separatists. Maybe they could even use the Separatists as a proxy force to seriously damage the Republic's military readiness. The problem is any conversation that Nam Anor or the Praetorite Vong would have with the Separatists will be recorded and then just sent directly to Palpatine. Which means that the Republic is actually several steps ahead of the Yuuzhan Vong. I mean, they might even know about the larger fleet that is waiting outside of the edges of the galaxy. They will be prepared. And here's the thing, the Praetorite Vong have access to advanced biotechnology, but they are still a relatively small invasion force, one that could easily be destroyed by the combined naval powers of the Republic and the Separatists. And here's the beauty of the plan, the Republic and the Separatists don't have to actually openly coordinate anything, and it's because both of these systems are designed to be ruled from the top down. And so Palpatine can just speak to Dooku directly, and the two can come up with a solution to end this Praetorite Vong threat, most likely by ambushing them with all of their might. Now, in this first ambush of the Praetorite Vong, the goal of the New Republic, or the Republic, should be to dismantle the fleet and prevent any Praetorite Vong from escaping or sending messages out to the major fleet. Republican Separatist forces would have a numerical advantage and element of surprise against the Praetorite Vong, but still, these aliens do have very advanced weapons and defensive systems that the people in the Star Wars galaxy wouldn't really understand how to counter, at least initially. Yuuzhan Vong ships, for instance, use a Dalvin Vassal, which generates artificial gravity, which powers both the ship at FTL and sublight speeds, and at the same time, the Dalvin Vassal can produce a mini black hole that soaks up energy laser fire. It's very hard to overwhelm a Dalvin Vassal, but New Republic pilots later found out that they could stagger their shots so that a Dalvin Vassal didn't have enough time to intercept all of the incoming fire. But even then, the Yuuzhan Vong ships were made up of an incredibly tough coral-like material. So I believe the Republic and the Separatists are going to be successful in this initial battle against the Praetorite Vong, but it will be an eye-opening moment for the galaxy. What would be even crazier is if any Jedi were a part of that initial strike force to stop the Praetorite Vong, is they would have felt no presence of life in any of their ships because the Yuuzhan Vong were cut off from the Force itself. Now, if the Republic is successful at preventing the Praetorite Vong from reporting back to the main fleet, then the Republic Navy and Separatist Navy will have a huge advantage. After Palpatine and Count Dooku sign a peace treaty marking an end to the Clone Wars, they can begin producing much more clone soldiers and a lot more battle droids, which will be useful at basically slowing the Yuuzhan Vong advance down. As good as the Coral Skipper's Dolphin Vassals are, it can't really withstand the fire of multiple cheap droid fighters who are shooting at it from many different angles. And as impressive and as powerful as the Lucre Hulk freighter used by the Confederate Navy might seem, it was just this large, cheap, converted ship that soaks up enemy fire. Similar tactics can be used on the ground battle. You have clone units working with more expendable droid units. Yes, I'm sure the clones will be pissed off at this arrangement, but it's nice not seeing your brothers having to draw enemy fire or getting blasted while taking point. Now they can get a bunch of dumb clankers to do the more dangerous things. And again, the Yuuzhan Vong pilots and warriors are very likely to go out of control and get into a frenzy once they learn that they're fighting mechanical beings. Because this is highly blasphemous, the Yuuzhan Vong warriors will probably begin ignoring actual mission objectives and go after these ships. This could actually be a great way to lure large groups of Yuuzhan Vong warriors into glorious but ultimately pointless deaths. And while you might be like, Alan, won't the Yuuzhan Vong just change their tactics, once you start using this tactic? Well, you underestimate how toxic the warrior caste in the Yuuzhan Vong are. I mean, during the invasion of Coruscant, a huge percentage of the warrior caste is completely wiped out, destroying the Yuuzhan Vong's military capabilities. And this is all because the Yuuzhan Vong insisted on engaging in urban combat on this planet and going from house to house, clearing everything. Which, if you've seen any videos that we've done about Coruscant, you'll know is just a terrible idea. This is a planet-wide city with close to 5,000 levels. There's probably tens of trillions of people living here. Even the Sith were smart enough to not take this planet. The defeat of the Praetorite Vong will be a hard-won victory by the Republic and the Separatists, and as they're licking their wounds, they probably will feel like they've accomplished something great. But here's the thing, even if the Yuuzhan Vong have no idea that an enemy fleet is waiting for them, I think the sheer size of the Yuuzhan Vong fleet will quickly overwhelm the combined forces of both the Separatists and the Republic. This is really just the scale thing. By the time the Clone Wars had started, the Sith had been quietly building up a federal military. I mean, this took decades to do, but even then, the Grand Army of the Republic was a fraction of the size of the Imperial military that replaced it. Its fleets were also quite small in comparison. The Confederacy even bent systems fielded a large and cheaper military force, but they also had severe limitations and resources and manpower. Basically, the galaxy just wasn't as heavily militarized at this point. And realistically, even if the Republic were able to predict where the main Yuuzhan Vong fleet will emerge, they still have to guard secondary approaches, population centers. As a defensive force, they have too much territory to guard. When the Yuuzhan Vong fleet finally emerges, with their massive world ships, their extended families and in-laws, that's when things really start getting messy. I think they'll smash through whatever Republican Confederate fleet that is assembled, scattering their forces in multiple directions. Now, in Legends, there's a theory that Palpatine actually created the Imperial military to specifically fight the Yuuzhan Vong. This is why the Imperial fleet has so many massive warships designed to slug it out at close ranges with other battleships. And the Death Star, well, it's overkill until you actually have to engage a ferocious living Yuuzhan Vong world ship. It's basically one part intergalactic cruiser and one part possessed demonic, Thomas the Tank Engine coming alive. Now, after the initial success by the Republic, the follow-up defeat will send the galaxy into panic. The Galactic Republic is actually in a much poorer state to fight the Yuuzhan Vong than even the New Republic in Legends, and that is because the New Republic had fought and won a conflict against the Empire, and it had a very well-trained military force with tons of battlefield-tested platforms. Also, the Imperial Remnant in Legends, along with many other minor factions, existed alongside the New Republic. This means that when the New Republic lost its capital, the other factions were still able to carry out their own local resistance movements. The Galactic Republic and Confederacy of Independent Systems both had borrowed heavily to build a military force in an accelerated timeline. Neither military force was really tested in combat, and as mentioned before, these are going to be significantly smaller forces than what the Empire had. The other major problem is that both the Republic and Confederacy were essentially both being supplied by the same military-industrial complex. I mean, it was an open secret that most of the large arms manufacturers sold to both sides of the conflict. And the even bigger problem is that most of the resource mining operations, the refining of those materials, and heavy industry is actually concentrated in the sparsely populated Outer Rim. This means that most of the Major battles in the early days of this conflict will be focused on Outer Rim hub worlds like Iradu, known for Lamite production, Sluisvan, which has one of the largest shipyards in the region alongside Fondor. There's also Geonosis with its massive droid foundry, Solus with its large mineral deposits and refinement capabilities, and Raxus, home of the Confederate Parliament. Hard decisions will have to be made by the Republic and Separatist leadership. They will have to choose to sacrifice certain planets and focus their efforts at saving only a few strategic planets. The Republic has always used the Outer Rim's massive size as a buffer for any potential outside invasion from either the Sith or the Mandalorians, and this time it won't be any different. Although again, because of the sheer size of the Yuuzhan Vong fleet, it'll be very hard for the Republic to do anything to halt their momentum. The best they can really hope for is a large salient to form where the Yuuzhan Vong begin spreading their resources to various planets, diluting their power. I believe that the vector for invasion will be very similar to the original one used in the New Jedi Order, somewhere alongside the Northwest Quadrant, around the world of Serenpadal and Belkaden. Belkaden was actually a forest world with the right environmental factors to support the Yuuzhan Vong breeding program. Remember, all of their technology is biological, so this is important. There's also a relative lack of fortress worlds in this part of the galaxy. I mean, I could see the Republic making a stand maybe at Megiddo. But again, until the concentrated Yuuzhan Vong fleet starts spreading out and the Republic starts adopting new tactics and weapon systems to fight the Yuuzhan Vong, I think the situation will be pretty grim for the Republic. Now, it is possible for the Yuuzhan Vong to make it all the way to Coruscant in this scenario, but I think one of the things that made New Republic so ripe for invasion is the fact that there was a lack of political unity, and there are a lot of small little factions that were split off from the New Republic. Also, the Chancellor of the New Republic, Boris Fayella, was a complete political monster who did everything possible to maintain power during a very dangerous war. This included having a very antagonistic relationship with the Jedi, who he perceived as gaining influence when they started attacking the Yuuzhan Vong. One could argue that under his watch, the New Republic forces were completely unorganized, and he was mainly focused on protecting political interests rather than strategic interests in fighting the Yuuzhan Vong. To his credit, when Coruscant was finally taken, he went down with the ship. I mean, he detonated a massive proton bomb beneath his desk as the Yuuzhan Vong stormed in. He killed tens of thousands of warriors. I actually think that Palpatine's strength as a totalitarian leader and his connection to Count Dooku here are ironically strengths. In times of great horror and danger, there is an advantage to having political unity and a singular vision. In the United States, during World War II and also during the Civil War, we've had presidents take on a lot of authority and eventually give it away. I mean, the real problem with Palpatine's type of leadership is that usually he's inventing threats to kind of unify his political power, but in this case, if there is an actual real threat, what he's doing is relatively justified. I do question Palpatine's and Dooku's military command capabilities, as they have mainly been fighting a controlled opposition. But I do not question the clones' abilities to fight, and it seems like the core Jedi leadership were pretty ruthless at orchestrating their side of the war. Combine that with the Republic's large wealth and population base and the Separatists' industrial base, there's a real chance that the Republic can hold on long enough for their manufacturing to start kick in so that they can finally outproduce the Yuuzhan Vong. The clones will probably have to be manufactured in even larger numbers. I can see the Spartai cloning cylinders with a 1-year turnaround coming into play. And of course, you'll need more melee-focused Separatist droids with heavy armor. I can see the BX Commando units and Magna Guards becoming more standard. The B1 battle droids are probably going to be useless against the average Yuuzhan Vong warrior in full armor with an anti-staff, but they could be useful against the Yuuzhan Vong slave forces. Either way, both the clones and the droids are royally going to piss off the Yuuzhan Vong, something that I'm sure Republic commanders will use to their advantage. I have to admit, when the Disney sequels came out, I was a little bit disappointed because I read 21 books. I don't think I've ever read that many books in any franchise before, so I was invested into this kind of part of Star Wars lore. Plus, like Luke and Han, they both have a family, and you really kind of get used to seeing those characters around, and they kind of just disappeared, which was sad. But yeah, the Yuuzhan Vong stuff, it is pretty campy. It's grimdark. A lot of people felt like it didn't fit the vibe of the overall galaxy, which I agree with, because the Yuuzhan Vong come from another galaxy. But all in all, what's great about the Yuuzhan Vong is they really do kind of put the drama in the Star Wars galaxy on hold. I mean, all the little silly things like the light side versus the dark side. Even the Imperial Remnant and the New Republic kind of join forces in order to face this bigger threat. Which reminds us that, sometimes you just need a larger alien invasion force to come in to unify the galaxy. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed our what if scenario. I definitely really like this one. I like taking a look at how different factions would interact with one another. So I look forward to seeing your commentary as well. Also, don't forget to subscribe. Hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.